Good morning, honorable members. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good. His mercy endureth forever. For our Moments of Impact devotional segment today, I want to speak from this topic, pursuing godly wisdom and knowledge. Living in times like these are very unique, difficult, and challenging. The world today has changed drastically from the world of yesterday. In my humble opinion, in order to be effective as a leader in this day and time, you need godly wisdom and knowledge. With that being said, I'm convinced that leaders who don't have wisdom and knowledge is like a leader sailing a ship without a sail. I recall a story today of the Bible of a man by the name of Solomon, who understood the importance of pursuing wisdom and knowledge from God while functioning in a leadership capacity. I want to read just a couple of verses from the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 1, beginning in verse 7. And it reads, "That night God appeared to Solomon and said, 'What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you.' Solomon replied to God, 'You showed great and faithful love to David, my father, and you have now made me king in his place. O Lord God, please continue to keep your promise to David, my father, for you have made me king over a people as numerous as the dust of the earth. Give me wisdom and knowledge to lead them properly, for who could possibly govern this great people of yours?' God gave Solomon a blank check and said, 'Whatever you want from me, I will give it to you.' Out of all the things Solomon requested, he requested wisdom and knowledge. Solomon's request for wisdom and knowledge was a sign of his selflessness. He valued service above self. This is what great leaders do. Solomon also requested wisdom for knowledge because it was a sign of his humility. Solomon didn't have a know-it-all mentality, or a mentality that says, 'I have it all figured out and I don't need divine intervention from God.' Solomon acknowledged his dependency on an all-wise and an all-knowing God. This is what great leaders do. God said to Solomon in verse 11, 'Because your greatest desire is to help your people, and you did not ask for wealth, riches, fame, or even the death of your enemies or long life, but rather you asked for wisdom and knowledge to properly govern my people.' In verse 12, 'I will certainly give you wisdom and knowledge you requested, but I will also give you wealth, riches, and fame, such as no other king has had before you, ever have in the future.' In conclusion, honorable members, as you lead our great nation, my encouragement to you today is to take a page out of Solomon's book and pursue godly wisdom and knowledge, not power, not prestige, not fame, not riches, not wealth, and not honor. And just like Solomon, if you pursue wisdom and knowledge, may Almighty God add riches and wealth and honor to you, the likes of which you have never seen before. Selah. Think and act on these things. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for granting us health and strength and allowing us to see yet another day. We lift up our beloved Bahamas land and we ask for your guidance and your direction. Heavenly Father, you see and you know all of the woes that we are facing. If there's ever a time we need your divine intervention, it is now. We ask you, Almighty God, to move on our behalf and show yourself strong in our midst. We ask that you will bind us together as a nation with cords that cannot be broken. May we be one people united in love and service. Lord, today I lift up these honorable members to you, and I pray that you would grant them wisdom and knowledge as they seek to govern this nation. Father, I lift up our nation's Commander-in-Chief, Prime Minister Philip Davis, and I ask you to strengthen, protect, regulate his mind, and give him clarity of thought and focus as he leads our nation. I ask that you would keep him in perfect health and continue to direct his path. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Let us repeat the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members. When this House ended its sitting on February 6th, we were at the first reading of bills. I am advised that it's the government's intention to move the order of the day to the questions on the agenda. Honorable members, I presume we are ready. The chair recognizes the honorable member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Madam Speaker, I do thank you. Yes, we intend to proceed with the order of the day, but with the concurrence of the members of the opposition, we wish to lay several bills, after which I shall ask for the order of the day.
Thank you, honorable member. Before we proceed, I would like to bring to the House attention that I would have received a correspondence from the Office of the Leader of the Opposition requesting the removal of the honorable member for Long Island from the Public Accounts Committee to be replaced with the honorable member for Central Grand Bahama, and I will now oblige those proceeding that request. We will now go down the order of business. We were at first reading of bills, second committal of
No,
bill.
It's the laying of documents, Madam
The
Speaker.
laying of documents. Honorable member for St. Anne's.
That's been agreed.
Thank you, honorable member. We will now revert to the order of business, laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Price Control General Amendment Regulations 2023.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Is there a seconder? No? Or document to lie on the table. For the laying of where am I this morning? For the laying of documents.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and on the table of the House a copy of the following: the National Honors Amendment Regulations 2023.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Order the document to lie on the table. For the laying of documents.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Public Debt Management Bahamas Registered Stock Number 2, 25, 2027, 2029, 2032, 2042, and 2052, Directions 2023.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Order the document lie on the table. For the laying of documents.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table the Public Debt Management Bahamas Registered Stock 2025, 2027, 2029, 2032, 2042, and 2052, Directions 2023.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up.
One more document.
order the document lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Royal Bahamas Police Force Commissioners Policing Plan 2023.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
No further laying, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Madam Speaker.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Yes, Madam Speaker. In the order of transparency and accountability, Madam Speaker, I now move for the order of the day to allow honourable ministers to answer questions that have been put to them.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Golden Gates.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to respond to the questions that are on the notice regarding the public service directed at the Honourable Fred Mitchell in his absence. Thank you. To the question, will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House whether the government will provide the annualized additional incremental costs associated with the labour agreements it has completed since coming to office? The government has estimated that the annualized incremental additional costs associated with the labour agreements that we have completed since coming to office is $18 million. We honored our commitment to public sector employees when we came to office, and we brought much overdue relief to scores of workers, including teachers, nurses, doctors, and other public sector employees. So these commitments were long overdue, and our administration is proud that we honored the obligations to these workers in our country. The second question is, will the government indicate if it aligns with relevant related budgetary allocations for the current fiscal year? Yes, we can confirm that the estimated annual additional incremental costs associated with the completed labour agreements align with the related and relative budgetary allocations for the current fiscal year. $20 million was allocated for labour agreements in the financial year 2022-2023. The government remains committed to ensuring that all budgetary allocations are carefully managed and monitored, and that all are in line with the government's broader fiscal goals and objectives. The question, will the government explain how the projected costs related to these labour agreements aligns with the reduction in public sector staff-related costs projected over the medium term in its Fiscal Strategy Report 2021? Well, the government forecasted a growth in public sector wages over the medium term from $163.9 million in financial year 2023-2024 to $941.7 million in financial year 2026-2027. The question, will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House as to when the government will pay the senior civil servants who have been sent on administrative leave and were found to have done nothing wrong, who were deployed out of their positions, and who were stripped from their legal posts and lawful secondments, the same way they have settled matters for the Financial Secretary and others? Well, Madam Speaker, this question seems to be in response to some accusation. So it's not clear what the accusation is or any specific names referred to. So I will say that personnel matters are confidential and private, and they will not be discussed without the leave of the individuals in whom they would probably be referring to. The Honourable Minister must advise the Honourable House as when will senior civil servants return to work. We don't know how to respond to that. So if they can offer which cases specifically and give leave of the individuals who are requesting information, and those individuals will be able to come and speak to the Ministry of Public Service if there are any concerns. Will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House as when senior civil servants who were stripped of their duties will be given work in line with their positions? We know of no cases where this has occurred. Will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House as to when the government will provide evidence that these officers were afforded the opportunity to defend against such charges as required under general orders? Whenever anyone, Madam Speaker, is placed on administrative leave or redeployed, the rules of the public service are followed and fully engaged. I think that is all the questions, and I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Ask that the responses to those questions be brought up. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for St. Anne's.
Before the next minister begins, is it the House's understanding that all the questions previously laid for addressed by the Honourable Frederick Mitchell have now been answered? Thank you. Thank you.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Marcos City.
While we're waiting on the Minister of State for Public Service, one of the matters that have been raised publicly and was referred to by the member is the case of Russell from the Ministry of Labour in Grand Bahama, who was in fact redeployed. That is one of the matters that has already been in the public domain, and if you can just speak to that so we can get a clearer understanding.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Golden.
Madam Speaker, now that you've presented the name, I will come back with the facts on that matter.
Order that the responses to lie on the table. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Elizabeth.
Speaker, just on the same subject. There were in fact, Madam Speaker, 5 administrators who were also deployed elsewhere, having left their original positions, having been placed, taken out of the main public service, made administrators. I've had multiple discussions on this matter, inclusive of a discussion with two discussions with the member for Kent Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, with respect to those administrators who are no longer a part of the administrators' corps. Again, are you able to explain to the public what has occurred with respect to those 5? Those are a part of the group that we've asked about.
By saying administrative leave or redeployment, the public service rules are fully engaged and followed, and that is the response.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, you may proceed. You may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, responding to questions put to Minister of Transport and Housing. First question is, will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House of the terms for the contract for the development of Pinecrest subdivision in the southern New Providence? What procurement method was used for these contracts? How many bids were received? What is the value of the contract? How much has been spent to date? In response, under the Housing Act, the Minister of Housing is a corporate soul and has the power to carry housing development, carry on any business or undertaking in or for the purpose of any housing development, promote and encourage the construction of dwellings, and promote and encourage the establishment of such projects and facilities as would appear to the Minister to enhance the standard of living, general welfare, and well-being of a person. The opposition should be aware that the Minister administration, of which the leader of the opposition and the member for East Grand Bahama served, published a request for proposal for private sector partner to construct homes on the island of New Providence. Upon coming to office, the review of proposals continued, and Iraq Homes Limited was selected as the private sector partner to build homes at Pinecrest. That's the answer. Second question, will the Honourable Minister confirm for the Honourable House the purpose why Bahamians were evicted from the domes in Abaco? I'm answering the questions. You can respond after.
There are several aspects of the question you answered.
I gave my answer.
So you don't intend to answer the remainder of the
I gave my answer. Second question, Madam Speaker. Will the Honourable Minister confirm for this Honourable House the purpose why Bahamians were evicted from the domes in Abaco? The opposition is directed to a press statement from the Office of the Prime Minister dated 9th of September 2022. As outlined in the press statement, a major priority for the government of the Bahamas is to rebuild communities devastated by Hurricane Dorian. Under the previous administration, of which the leader of the opposition and the member for East Grand Bahama served, the domes of Spring City were designed for temporary shelter and not long-term use. Additionally, several concerns were raised in the public domain about the conditions. I said and. You understand? And or, and. You're part of that group. You're part of that group. We were in it together, remember? You forgot? And.
Say including.
Under the previous administration, which included 1, the leader of the opposition, and the member for East Grand Bahama. They both served. The domes in Spring City were designed for temporary shelter and not long-term use. Additionally, several concerns were raised in the public domain about the conditions at Spring City. In so many ways, the Minister administration appeared unconcerned about the welfare of the people of Abaco after Hurricane Dorian, in the same way that our administration thinks it's unconscionable to leave the unidentified remains of hurricane victims in a trailer for 8 months, so we think it unconscionable to allow people to live long-term in shelters, which pose a major risk to personal and public health. Next question, Madam Speaker. Will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House why the Member of Parliament for South Abaco seemed blindsided with the decision to demolish the domes? Did her ministry advise the Member of Parliament for South Abaco of the date and time when the domes were demolished? Madam Speaker, answer. It is improper and unwise for the Minister of Transport and Housing to speculate on the thought process of another member of the Honourable House. However, a multi-government agency committee had oversight of this project, and there was extensive dialogue with occupants of the domes. The dialogue included clear timelines and the provision of special social assistance for verified dome occupants. Next question, Madam Speaker. Will the Honourable Minister confirm to this Honourable House the member of Parliament purpose of removing these domes is to make space for a new housing development? If so, can the Minister confirm if the bid to construct these homes have gone out to tender? Answer, Madam Speaker. The opposition should be aware that the Minister administration, of which the leader of the opposition and the member for East Grand Bahama served, erected domes on the land that is within an existing housing development called Spring City. Next question, Madam Speaker. Will the Honourable Minister confirm for this Honourable House the exact number of taxi given out or distributed since the PLP came to office? Answer, Madam Speaker. The opposition is directed to a press statement from the Ministry of Transport and Housing dated 22nd of June 2022. As outlined in the press statement, the government of the Bahamas intends to modernize the transportation sector. A critical component of this goal is to bring long overdue changes to the distribution of taxi plates and to empower Bahamians. As the Minister of Transport and Housing, I wish to advise the opposition that the process is not complete and remains in progress. Additionally, as the month of May is the period of renewal of franchises for taxi and livery plates, it would be improper for the Minister to confirm an exact number at this time. However, the Minister is minded to definitely state that efforts to improve the transportation sector is ongoing and that all decisions have been made and will be made in the interest of the Bahamian people. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the documents be brought. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Markham City.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to go to the first question that was raised with respect to the Minister of Transport and Housing. I want to put on the record several aspects of the question was not answered at all or even attempted. What is the value of the contracts or contract that had been issued relative to the housing development? Secondly, how much was spent to date? Madam Speaker, we also asked what were the terms of the contract. None of these, which are extremely important, we believe, to the public and has not been disclosed previously, we believe that the government has an obligation to answer when answering the questions. This is not, Madam Speaker, a simple exercise of getting up and making a few statements that refers to the question. We are expecting that the public is going to be provided with accurate information, and the Minister has made very little attempt with respect to that question in terms of answering the question. The second question, with respect to member for Central and South Abaco, clearly based on his public statements that he was not aware, and we were just seeking to understand the process by which that decision was executed. We know from past experience sitting in Cabinet, if you meet on Tuesday, you have a good sense of what's going to happen the remainder of the week concerning major projects. I just found it startling that no one would have thought to inform the members of Parliament in that particular constituency of an action so significant that was about to be taken. Madam Speaker, the taxi plate issue is a very important one, and we believe the Minister has an obligation to address this particular issue. Even though the process is ongoing, the Minister can indicate how many taxi plates were given out up to this point. And this is particularly important in light of two facts. One fact being that the union has taken issue, as well as practitioners in that area, of the amount of plates that they believe to have been issued. Some of them speculated somewhere in the vicinity of 600 or so. In this House, when we heard from the Minister, we never got a sense that it even exceeded 150. That is a huge discrepancy that we thought the Minister may wish to clarify for members of the public. We are also aware that there have been several suspensions of senior officers and other officers in the ministry with respect for transport, and it is our understanding related to the taxi plates. And so the Minister would want to clarify what was the nature of decisions made by these individuals that resulted in no less than the Prime Minister intervening and a number of those persons having been suspended. And this is extremely important that the Minister speaks to that particular issue.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the responses to lie on the table. Further questions? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Central and South Eleuthera.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question. Will the Honourable Minister advise the Honourable House what is the rationale for discontinuing the public-private partnership on the packing houses, feed mill and abattoir? The rationale for discontinuing the public-private partnership on the packing house, feed mill and abattoir is based on several factors, including concerns about the project's viability, the level of private sector interest, and the potential cost to the government. With regard to the feed mill, it should be noted that under the previous administration, the ministry received 4 responses to the expression of interest However, only 3 entities met the criteria after review and were invited to present a proposal. After this process was concluded, only 1 entity was under consideration. This entity proposed a minimum investment and wanted controlling interest, which was not deemed feasible by the government and was not pursued. The government remains committed to exploring opportunities for public-private partnerships where they are viable and appropriate. It will continue to assess all potential projects on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Marco City.
Madam Speaker, I wish if the Minister would indulge us and explain with respect to the parking houses, what was the rationale for not pursuing a public-private partnership with respect to the parking houses. Sorry?
You good?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Further questions? Further responses to questions? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Centerville.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, several questions were also asked of myself. Oh, thanks. Thank you. The first being, will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House of the status of the pilot project for the rollout of the Freedom of Information Act announced in November 2021. Madam Speaker, I can happily say that we are now at the stage where training has begun for information managers of the 10 pilot agencies for the rollout of the FOI regime. As for question 2, this is the specific rollout dates for each of the agencies within the pilot project. As to this question, Madam Speaker, we are unable to give specific dates with certainty due to the fact that there are some dependent variables that are beyond our control, and these dates can move the goalposts from time to time. I think that point was also reaffirmed by the Commissioner himself. Madam Speaker, in response to question 3, what is the timeline for the rollout of the FOIA for all remaining public sector agencies and state-owned enterprises? The answer is the same as for question 2, as per the variables, which I'm sure colleagues are aware of. With respect to those questions, Madam Speaker, they are the answers. I was also asked as to whether the Honourable Minister will advise this Honourable House of the terms of engagement for the consulting firm McKinsey and Company. Madam Speaker, as to any and all questions relating to McKinsey and Co., I am unable to provide any information, as this matter is not under the carriage of the Office of the Attorney General and is currently in the purview of the Ministry of Finance. There are several questions relating to McKinsey and Co. I will go through them as due process requires. What procurement process was used to engage this firm? Madam Speaker, again, I am unable to answer that question, as the particulars of McKinsey and Co. are not under the carriage of the Office of the Attorney General and is currently under the purview of the Ministry of Finance. How many bids? The third question was how many bids were received. The answer is the same as answer to question 2. Question 4, what is the value of the contract and how much has been spent to date? Again, I am unable to answer this question. We do not have that information under the carriage of my ministry. Those were the extent of my questions, Madam Speaker.
Other than the responses be brought up?
Madam Speaker.
Other than the response still on the table, Mr. Ford? Again, this response. Other than the response still on the table. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. With respect to question number 7, Madam Speaker, can members opposite indicate whether or not any of them are in a position to comment on McKinsey and Company? One of the members are acting in the stead of the Minister of Finance. If that member can speak to that question.
Madam Speaker,
The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's.
when you read the House of Assembly notice of motions, essentially the agenda that's before us now with the questions, the question is, will the Honourable Minister advise the Honourable House of the terms of engagement for the consulting firm McKinsey and Company? If the member from Centreville is not the Honourable Minister that this question relates to, which he clearly knew before he came here, the House shouldn't have its time wasted by an individual standing up and saying it's not me. The minister responsible, who's the Minister of Finance, should be here to answer the question after all this time since the question was raised in September of 2002, or a minister representing the Honourable Minister of Finance should do that. Now, I don't hold anything against what's happened now, but for the sake of use of the House's time, let's bear that in mind, that when a question is asked of the Honourable Minister that has carriage of the matter, then that minister should have carriage of the matter. We're not in cabinet. We're not in cabinet to know which minister it is. So let the minister who's responsible answer it, and not have a show of people appearing saying it's not me.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for
Madam
West
Speaker, the rules are very clear. Members put a question to the honourable member for Centreville. Having put the question, the member must answer. It is the responsibility of the side opposite to determine who and which ministry one represents, and to determine where a particular portfolio falls. So, member, we understand it is a mistake made on your part. You can put the question a second time, if you wish, on the notice, but it is not for us to do your job.
Thank you, honourable member. Further responses? Prime Minister, going to answer this question? Something. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fort Charlotte.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, question number 19. Will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House as to whether Bahamas Power and Light is using operational revenue to cover the increased fuel costs to the company? Answer. The company is not using operational revenue to cover the increased fuel costs. The company has an accrual that has built up with the supplier due to the actual costs outpacing the fuel charge collected. The second component of that question, if so, will the government indicate how this expenditure is to be covered, and if the government will be required to provide a taxpayer-funded subsidy to BPL to cover any element of the fuel expenditure? Answer. The fuel charge under recovery will be recovered via the recently implemented glide path recovery mechanism, which will be used to pay for current and overdue balances to the supplier. What the government has done is to top up existing facilities to BPL. I'm referring specifically to the 2019 and the 2021 loans. These loan facilities provide BPL with additional cash to meet its obligations. The arrangements of these loans are the subject of ongoing negotiation between BPL and the Ministry of Finance. Question number 20. Will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House whether the government intends to subsidize Bahamas Power and Light, as the Prime Minister indicated via social media? Answer. The answer to this question have been given at question 19.2, which I have just read. It should be noted that this was a policy that was entered into by the previous administration. Subsection 2. When this policy was formally communicated to the Bahamian public? Answer. This position was communicated to the Bahamian public on the 4th of October 2022 during the Prime Minister's address pertaining to the fuel charge increase. Section 3. What is the value of the subsidy? Answer. As I have indicated, this is not a subsidy, but a top-up of the existing facilities by way of a loan which was entered into in 2019 and 2021. The present value of the facility is pegged at $100 million. Subsection 4. How much has been paid out? Answer. To date, approximately $50 million advance to BPL by way of a loan. 5. Subsection 5. If the subsidies are to cover the increased cost of fuel, how does this align with the law that requires BPL to adjust the surcharge to meet its fuel obligation? Answer. The government's interim funding aligns with the regulation that requires BPL to adjust the surcharge to recover all prudently incurred fuel costs. That is, the interim funding will be repaid from the funds recovered via the fuel charge. Subsection 6. Is the government in breach of the related regulations? Answer. The fuel charge regulations provide for accrual within prescribed limits. In order to insulate consumers from the impact of rapidly rising fuel costs brought on by the Ukraine crisis, BPL delayed the pass-through to coincide with the economy's emergence from the shocks brought on by Hurricane Dorian and the COVID-19 pandemic. Question number 34. Will the Honourable Minister advise this House if it is true that had the government not delayed the cost paid by Bahamians would have been less than they are now, as stated by the chairman of the Bahamas Power and Light? Answer. The overall costs by Bahamians would remain the same regardless of the recovery, as the fuel costs are a direct pass-through. However, the monthly fuel charge, as in the case of the recently announced glide path schedule rates, is dependent on the period set for the recovery. It is noted that the government sought to hold the fuel charge constant to provide price stability to the consumer over a fixed period, and is now facilitating the recovery of the accrued amount over an equitable, comparable period to dampen the impact of the same, as announced in October by the Prime Minister. Question 35. Will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House as to why the government has not removed value-added tax off the fuel purchased by the Bahamas Power and Light and passed on to the consumer? Answer. The government has not removed VAT on fuel purchases because BPL charges VAT on the electricity which it produces. The removal of VAT would impose on the suppliers of the fuel a cost increase which would be greater than the VAT on the fuel. This cost increase would be transferred to the consumers of electricity. It is to be remembered that VAT is charged on the importation of fuel, and disallowing VAT on the sale of fuel would lead to an increase in the price of fuel. Most fuel used for generation is diesel, so this decision would impact other consumers, not just BPL. Thank you.
Thank you. I will let the response to the questions be brought up.
Marco City ask of me, will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House if has been as required by the Public Procurement Act? No prospective vendor brought forward any complaint to be considered by the Procurement Review Tribunal. As a result, the government, mindful of the new Procurement Act, has not appointed a Procurement Review Tribunal. Second question, which follows the first, who are the members of the Procurement Review Tribunal? Well, please see the above. In other words, the responses contained in the first answer. By notice of the same date, question number 10, the Honourable Member asked, the Honourable Member asked, every government agency and state-owned enterprise are publishing the summary details of contracts awarded consistent with the requirements of the Public Procurement Act. The Ministry of Finance, in conjunction with Go Upon Fire, is finalizing the report listing contracts awarded by the government. We aim to have the first edition published in due course. Which specific agencies, the second question, which specific agencies are compliant? All ministers, departments, and agencies will be fully compliant. Which agencies are not compliant? The answer is above. The next question of the same date, will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House of the scope of works for Rothschild and Company in their advisory capacity? Rothschild and Company has been engaged in an advisory capacity by the government to provide guidance and support in the international debt market. As one of the leading, highly specialized international financial advisory firms with expertise in debt management, Rothschild provides strategic advice to the government on various aspects of its international debt portfolio. The advice includes the analysis of market conditions, identification of potential risks and opportunities, and the provision of recommendations on the most effective ways to structure and manage the government's debt portfolio. The scope of work for Rothschild involves a detailed review of the government's current debt profile and the provision of ongoing support in implementing any recommended strategies. They are also brokering relationships with bondholders and other market actors. What is the value and duration of the contract? The contract is for 1 year in the first instance. The monetary value of the contract is subject to the usual provisions to protect commercial confidentiality, but consistent with the cost of this type of arrangement. The broader value of this contract can be seen in the debt being reduced. I'll have to write this in. He didn't type this one. Reduced from 101% of GDP. No, sorry, it's now being reduced to 87% of GDP from 101% GDP, which we inherited from the last administration. I repeat that. The broader value of the contract can be seen in the national debt being reduced to 87% as I speak and headed downward of GDP from 101% of GDP, which we inherited from the last administration. That's y'all. It's just to make it clear, it's y'all. Members will recall that the previous administration brought an average of $2 billion per year, each year, without a single school, hospital, road, clinic, or airport to show for it. Madam Speaker, we are proud that our approach to debt management is based on the kind of competent leadership which the Bahamian people elected us to provide. On the same date, the member from Marco City asks, will the Honourable Minister confirm that the provisions of the Debt Management Act were followed with the announced $20 million loan to the Ministry of Housing? You got to understand, you know, when you ask these questions, you got to understand governance. Okay. Just demonstrate. No, he said he was not involved, even though he's in cabinet. You know, so I don't understand why. You know.
It wasn't me.
It wasn't me. You know, the cabinet was. But let me just say, we can confirm that the provisions of the Debt Management Act were followed for the $20 million loan to the Ministry of Housing. Right. The loan was acquired in accordance with the guidelines and regulations outlined in the Act. But just let me say, the Ministry of Housing, being a corporation sole, is authorized to receive advances or loans from financial institutions, whether from the public or private sectors, to fulfill its mandate of developing homes. The ministry therefore obtained the necessary approvals and followed due process in securing the loan. The loan was made in order to support the highly successful affordable housing programs now being undertaken by the government under the member from Elizabeth. Now, just to make it clear, and it's in the second question I asked, were the proceeds of the loan deposited in the Consolidated Loan Fund as required by the Act. The Debt Act does not apply in this case. The Ministry of Housing is a corporation sole. They borrowed the money. As such, and if you look at the Act, it'll tell you. Let's look at the Housing Act. You'll see what it is. The loan proceeds were deposited into the account of the corporation sole in accordance with the relevant regulations and guidelines and Act. Third question. Was the process to select a lender done through a competitive bidding process? The government can confirm that a competitive bidding process was used to select the lender for the $20 million loan to the Ministry of Housing. The process involved issuing a request for proposals to select a group of potential lenders, followed by a rigorous evaluation process to determine the most suitable lender for the project. This is what has been advised to us, and I believe my advice. The selection process was carried out in accordance with the standard procurement procedures, and all interested parties were given an equal opportunity to participate. The chosen lender met all the necessary criteria, including financial stability, experience, and capacity to provide the required financing. Who has ultimate responsibility for repayment of the loan? Well, who borrowed it? I would have thought. The ultimate responsibility for the loan repayment rests with the corporation's sole account of the Ministry of Housing, as it is the entity that received and borrowed the loan. And the Ministry of Housing is responsible for managing the loan and ensuring that all repayment obligations are met under the terms of the loan. What fees, charges, interest rates associated with the facility? The fees, charges, and interest rates associated with the $20 million loan to the Ministry of Housing are disclosed in the government's quarterly debt report. In addition, the report provides a detailed breakdown of the terms and conditions of the loan, including any fees or charges incurred, as well as the interest rate applied to the facility. The quarterly debt report is available on the website of the Ministry of Finance or can be obtained by making a request to the relevant government agency. If you require further information or assistance in receiving the report, you may contact the Ministry of Finance or, again, the Ministry of Housing directly. With the government lay the agreement in the House of Assembly, the government has no obligation to lay the agreement for the $20 million loan in-house, as this is not a loan that the government guaranteed, nor is it a government loan. It's a loan to the corporation sole. Loan is provided to the Ministry of Housing, as I said, a corporation sole, and they're responsible for managing its finances and repayment obligations. As such, the government has no direct involvement or responsibility for the loan. Therefore, there's no legal obligation to present the loan agreement in the House of Assembly. Will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House if the government will ensure that now past due reports from the Fiscal Responsibility Council be provided to Parliament and published as required by the Fiscal Responsibility Act? The government acknowledges the importance of complying with the requirements of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, including the obligation to provide reports from the Fiscal Responsibility Council to Parliament and to publish them. However, the Minister of Finance does not have direct authority over the activities of the Fiscal Responsibility Council. The Council is an independent body established by law, and its members are appointed by the Governor General, acting on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. It is the responsibility of the Council to produce and submit its report to Parliament, and the Government expects that the Council will fulfill its mandate and meet its obligations under the Act. The government will take appropriate action to ensure that the Council is supported and has the necessary resources to carry out its functions effectively. Will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House why the government provided a budget with a target deficit that is outside the fiscal objectives the government set in its own Fiscal Strategy Report 2021, when the Fiscal Responsibility Act expressly requires the government to produce a budget consistent with the deficit targets established in the annual Fiscal Strategy Report? Madam Speaker, there's no legal requirement that the annual budget be an exact replica of the Fiscal Strategy Report. However, the annual budget is consistent with the broader goals and objectives of the Fiscal Strategy Report we submit, including the focus on deficit reduction. The government remains committed to its fiscal targets, and the budget was formulated with this objective in mind. While this target deficit for the budget may differ slightly from the targets established in the Fiscal Strategy Report, the overall strategy for reducing the deficit and achieving fiscal sustainability remains the same. The government will continue to work towards achieving its fiscal objectives and ensuring that the country's finances remain sustainable. And as was made clear in the recent midterm reports, the government is succeeding. Our strategic, competent management of public finance sits in stark contrast to what went before us under the previous administration. Of the billions of dollars borrowed and spent, I repeat, there was not a single new road, not a single school, not a single airport, not a single hospital, not a single clinic to show for it. Oh, no house either. I'll add that in here. No, not one. Another question, will the Honourable Minister advise this Honourable House as to why the government implemented the elimination of duty on yachts purchased and operated by wealthy people outside of the required parliamentary process? This category is not a significant revenue earner for the government. If anyone looks at it, you'll see that it's negligible or non-existent. We don't collect money. People don't import their yachts to the Bahamas. And one of the reasons why is the fact that we have duty on yachts. And it's a disincentive for the creation of the yacht registry, which we both have been touting over the many years. Right? So we therefore consider it more useful as a mechanism for the purpose of building our yacht registry to eliminate a tax that we ain't collecting anyhow because people are not importing their vessels. The elimination of duty on yachts purchased and operated by wealthy individuals is an issue that's been discussed extensively by government and various stakeholders. And there is a recognition that this policy can provide significant benefits to the maritime industry in the Bahamas. So, however, to date, no importer has utilized this mechanism, and the government will continue to examine ways to encourage greater investment and growth in this sector. Does the government recognize that its excuse claiming that this unauthorized tax cut is facilitated by the remission clause makes no sense, as such permission is not applicable? That's a very curious question. And let's say this. The government has assessed the situation and determined that the remission clause is the relevant legislation applied to the issue of duty elimination on yachts purchased and operated by wealthy individuals. However, to date, there have been no qualifying reports, and thus the issue has not arisen in practice. The government remains, however, committed to ensuring that all laws and regulations are applied appropriately and will continue to monitor and assess the situation as it develops. Next question. Will the Honorable Prime Minister lay on the table of this House the list of individuals and companies who have been awarded government contracts since the PLP came to office, considering that this government is in violation of the Public Procurement Act? You know, Madam Speaker, the previous procurement system in use on September 1st, 2021, right, did not capture all required information as specified in the Public Procurement Act. As a result, the government is preparing a report that will provide more information on the individuals and companies awarded government contracts since the PLP came into office. The report will outline the steps to ensure compliance with the Act, including creating a procurement career path in the public service and acquiring new procurement software. The government is committed to transparency and accountability in all its procurement processes. We work to ensure that all future procurements are conducted in accordance with the Public Procurement Act once the report is completed, and it will be laid on the table of the House. Will the Prime Minister advise this Honourable House as to why this government continues to break the law in relation to the Public Procurement Act? You know, of course, we don't share the view that any law has been broken. You know, we are not like them. They break the law, at least anyhow. While the government acknowledges the importance of compliance with the Act, it has been working diligently to address these issues since coming into office on September 22nd, 2021. I recognize now the very act he's talking about, right, only came into force on the 1st of September, right, in the middle of a campaign. Right, in the middle of the campaign. Right? And on the 26th of September, we came into office. Right? I just say this, that the act was passed in a cynical attempt by the previous administration to appear to be fiscally responsible. However, it did not come into force until several months after, as I pointed out, it had been passed, and days before the general election. The provisions were hastily designed and left the legislation unworkable in many respects. For example, the enabling resources and training to effect implementation were not in place. The government has taken several steps, which we have, to address the gaps in the procurement system, including tabling a revised act, creating a procurement career path in the public service, and acquiring new procurement software. These measures are intended to ensure that all future procurement processes comply with the Procurement Act that is to be passed. However, the government remains committed, as we say, to transparency, accountability, and good governance in all its activities, and will work to ensure that all laws and regulations are applied appropriately. Thank you.
Number 8.
What's number 8?
First one.
Who's number 8 over there? I answered that one. Huh? See, you have two questions here. That's the same thing. 8 and 9 is the same. Yeah, but I answered both of them. I answered both of them. You'll see when I later.
Order that the responses be put up.
On 8, no, sorry, let me see, 8. Huh? Yeah. Yeah, my 8, yeah, it got caught over here.
28.
No, 8, the answer to 8. Yeah. Is, I didn't read 8, I have it here. Despite unprecedented levels, the question is, will the Honorable Minister advise this Honorable House whether the Public Procurement Board has been appointed as required by the Public Procurement Act? Despite unprecedented levels of borrowing and expenditure, which left our national debt at more than 100%, the previous administration failed to properly and fully account for how billions of dollars of public money was spent or who the recipients were of that spending. The Public Procurement Act, I reiterate, came into force on the 1st of September 2021, the dying days of that administration. We remain committed to making public procurement transparent and accountable. And we did not, the board was not appointed. Yeah.
Oh, PM.
Yeah. Okay. While the previous government had identified individuals to be appointed to the public, that's what you all did. While the previous government had identified individuals to be appointed to the Public Procurement Board, these individuals were never formally appointed. After reviewing the Act, the current administration had serious concerns about the structure of the Public Procurement Board and decided it was not in the best interest to proceed with the previous government's appointments. So there are no members. Right? Is the board reviewing all bid contracts over? Again, there's no board, so there could be no review. But as per the law, all ministries, departments, and agencies are required to have a board that reviews all procurement opportunities if the value of the bid exceeds $250,000. It is then submitted to the procurement department for either no objection review. Of course, this is a sharp contrast to the practices of the previous administration, under which many procurement arrangements remain to date obscure.
28.
What's 28? Let's try and put this in order. Yeah, coming to you right now.
It's 28.
Will the Honourable Member disclose to this Honourable House the amounts that were paid to the Financial Secretary and others to settle cases or matters related to administrative leave and redeployment? The government paid no amounts to the Finance Secretary or others to cease matters related to administrative leave and redeployment. Confidential settlements arrive at, with respect to previous administrations, willful violation of the rights of certain individuals as settled in the Constitution and in various legislation.
What did the
Responses
be brought up?
Please stop on their feet if they might answer question number 27 relative to McKinsey Group.
That was answered.
Was an answer.
They were answered. The person whom we asked the question answered it, and I'm not answering it today. You directed it to the minister, to Minister Campbell, right? And he answered. What's the date?
Madam Speaker, having now completed the answer to all the questions that lay in the order paper, we now wish to return to the order of business to arrive at the point where we begin debate for the Select Committee. Are members of the opposition ready, or would you prefer not?
We also have notices of future questions. If this is the suitable time, we would put them, but
Period of
we'll
notice.
wait until after.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
New questions will come in notices.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So do you agree that we go down the order of business?
We refer in the regular order of business to arrive at selection of committees.
So we're now at committees,
We will go
No,
down the
we will
order
go
to
down
get
the order of business.
starting from,
where we are now. Right. Good point.
We will now revert back to the order of business. When we suspended, we were at first reading of bills. I presume that we are now. Yes, yes. Second reading and committal of bills. Committee of the whole House. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. Member statements. Appointment of select committees. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As we've given notice in a previous sitting, our intention to call for 2 select committees today. We wish to proceed with one of them, and it is our hope that the government would concur. Madam Speaker, we believe that there is a small window of opportunity for us to address several critical matters that affect our country. Madam Speaker, we have said on this side, and some members on the other side have concurred, that we face several crises simultaneously. We believe, Madam Speaker, that one of the crucial issues that we face is that of illegal immigration and our failure as a country to comprehensively address the issue of migration in a constructive manner. Madam Speaker, we believe that failure to seize this moment may result in deeper consequences that can further damage the quality of life throughout our country. One key component of our National Development Plan, Madam Speaker, must be to put in place a comprehensive immigration and, of course, migration policy on multiple fronts. The Bahamas is at a crossroad. This Parliament has a chance to rise to the occasion and, in a bipartisan way, chart a course that comprehensively addresses the complex and deeply troubling problem of illegal immigration and irregular migration. We must not end this debate without arriving at a shared approach to tackling a familiar challenge that ordinary approaches have failed to alter. It cannot be business as usual. We must send a clear message, Madam Speaker, to the public that our approach from this day forward will be fundamentally different, and it would be sustained and results-driven. And our work will be transparent, and the policies we pursue will be evidence-based. The decisions made by this Parliament can directly have a bearing on whether or not we drive orderly development of our country and truly develop our urban centers and historical communities. We must not surrender any community to ad hoc development. not Angliston, not Baintown, not any of the communities in Eleuthera, in the Valley, Kemp Road, Treasure Key, North Andros, any of our communities, from Inagua to Grand Bahama and Bimini. Madam Speaker, today's decision must signal our resolve to end the ad hoc, unregulated development of not only our physical but our social environment. The way we structure our communities and integrate and develop our people must be intentional. The new Bahamas we seek to create must be built on shared values, common goals, shared respect for law and order. Our work as a government and as a people towards this end must be executed, Madam Speaker, with urgency. Our humanity and Christian values must guide our approach. Our solemn commitment to protect our country and utilize our resources primarily for the benefit of our citizens and secondarily for others who we welcome in on clearly defined terms must be our foundation. Our energies, Madam Speaker, must be used to build a dynamic and robust economy that fuels prosperity for those that would be industrious, but not only them, Madam Speaker, but also for the most vulnerable who suffer despite their best efforts. Our energies must build a social system that values cohesion, civility, continuous learning, and respect for God, person, and property. Madam Speaker, one of the obstacles to us building the quality nation we desire is our failure to design and execute immigration and migration policies for the modern Bahamas. Madam Speaker, we cannot afford to fail. We must not fail. We must not cave in to any extreme views or voices that feeds hatred and xenophobia and blames every challenge on migrants. Nor must we surrender our borders, crown land, and limited resources to those whose focus is their survival or advancement with little or no concern of the impact of their actions and the impact these actions have on our country, our systems, and our way of life. Madam Speaker, it is universally accepted that migration, when properly managed, ensures or endures and contributes to the benefit of all parties and countries and the global community. I say that immigration must be well managed if it is going to work in the interests of Bahamian communities, our economy, our security, and the future of our children. Illegal immigration has been a perennial challenge for our country, particularly in the last few decades, and it has challenged us to find solutions to balance and control the notion that unless we do something, Bahamians will lose their God-given patrimony in the land of their father and mother's birth. Madam Speaker, it is clear that we must determine the manner in which persons enter our country, and we must set up the parameters within which they operate so that both them, but more importantly, our children and children's children will benefit from our patrimony. And so, Bahamian leaders for the past 50 years or more have all hoped for a day when the Republic of Haiti, our brothers and sisters to the southeast of us, might realize the political and economic stability and security which would provide the conditions necessary for them to remain home and not risk all in unsafe conditions at sea. Madam Speaker, many of us have held these hopes. But nevertheless, many of our brothers and sisters in search of a better life have made their way to or through the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, in his biography entitled Pinling, The Life and Times of Lyndon Oscar Pinling, first Prime Minister of the Bahamas, 1930 to 2000, Sir Lyndon, at page 248, recognized the following relative to illegal migration to the Bahamas. He said, "The worst immigration problem related to illegal immigrants, overwhelmingly from Haiti, but also from Jamaica and other West Indian territories. In this respect, the PLP government was in something of a cleft stick. It needed to restrict an unimaginable flow of unskilled workers from the poor countries, but did not want to be accused of racism against fellow blacks by adopting too harsh a program of repatriation. This dilemma, fortunately mitigated by the very prosperity which drew migrants, was never satisfactorily resolved during the 25 years of the PLP." Prime Minister Hubert Alexander Ingram, in his book, I Say What I Mean and I Mean What I Say, Hubert A. Ingram, in his own words, page 906, says, "I especially look forward to the day when countless thousands of Haitians will no longer risk their lives by setting out on unseaworthy vessels, heading for the Bahamas and the United States of America in search of a better life. This desire for Haiti is not, I believe, an F&M or PLP agenda item. This, as with virtually every foreign policy issue, is a Bahamian agenda item, Madam Speaker. The Bahamian agenda item, as faced by Pinling, Ingram, Christie, and ministers before us, must be treated with the utmost discretion, sensitivity, but certainly, Madam Speaker, urgency. There is no place or space in bringing resolution to this issue for those preaching hatred, xenophobia, vigilantism, or racism. But also, Madam Speaker, there should be very little room for those who will throw up the white flag in surrender and do very little or do much of the same that has not yielded the results our people have long cried and yearned for. As fate would have it, thousands of Haitians have taken this often perilous voyage over the years, and in the process, far too many have perished along the way. With the nearest distance between Haiti and the Bahamas being just 55 nautical miles, the prosperous islands of the Bahamas is the obvious choice for those seeking to escape the abject poverty and inhumane violence of the poorest country, certainly one of them in the Western Hemisphere, where the population, Madam Speaker, is estimated somewhere in the vicinity of 11 million. The temptation and the risk for better is in all of us, and many of our brothers and sisters in Haiti pursues it. And when they do, we are at risk of being, in many ways, overpowered. Moreover, Madam Speaker, the archipelagic makeup of our islands, which spreads more than 100,000 miles of sea, makes it difficult for us to protect our borders and, in so doing, protect the integrity of our country. And, Madam Speaker, what is occurring in Haiti, for many observers, they seem not to be able to determine where the end of the collapse is. There is no elected political leaders in place, and more than 100 gangs, some estimate, continue to rule the streets of the country. Madam Speaker, we welcome the decision of the 44th meeting of the heads of government of CARICOM, along with Canada, to render assistance to Haiti to address the current challenges in partnership with those that presently attempt to govern the country. But, Madam Speaker, the primary thing we must do in this place is to protect the interests of Bahamians, those that are here and those that are unborn. And so we simply cannot sit by idly with our fingers crossed in hope that we would find a way. We have to collectively make a way, forge a way. And that requires the collaborative efforts of all stakeholders. Unrest in Haiti must not be allowed to destabilize the Bahamas. We must resolve to do all within our powers with the help of our regional and international partners to mitigate against the crippling impact on our nation and the impact that unchecked migration can have. This notion that illegal migrants openly ignoring the rules and regulations established by legislation is a matter that we must address. But, Madam Speaker, to simply put this on migrants is to not face the truth of the matter that many Bahamians participate in the violation of our laws, and any overall policy regime must tackle all dimensions of what contributes to the situation that we find ourselves in. Madam Speaker, unregulated migration from Haiti or anywhere else poses challenges to our security, our healthcare system, our educational system, our social services, our economy, and more. Resultantly, as the temperature on our streets and at our dinner tables throughout the Bahamas rise, we run a very serious risk of coming close to or hitting that tipping point where, Madam Speaker, rhetoric and outrage may result in unintended consequences. So, Madam Speaker, we believe, as members of the opposition, that it is important that the government looks at how all of us can work collaboratively in order to address this crucial issue, which is one of many. We believe that one of the mechanisms that can assist us is the establishment of a select committee, Madam Speaker, that has the authority to examine all of those areas of our national life that intersect with this particular challenge. To leave this debate arguing that each of the organs of government, we simply need to manage them better, I do not believe, Madam Speaker, will do. I do not believe that the public will buy that more of the same is going to produce the results that we need as a country. Madam Speaker, the importance of the Select Committee is to allow our citizens to engage in this discussion, and we should never underestimate that when we hear from this public, what positive results can be yielded. This mechanism of Parliament that increases the participation of our citizens, critiques and improve policies, and help ministries to know better how we might improve their operation in the real world and what needs to change in order to make things better. Madam Speaker, the committee will give citizens an opportunity to express their views based on their first-hand experiences. We will have a chance to carefully examine all of those departments that impact the implementation, not just the implementation, the formulation of immigration and migration policies. Parliamentarians should want to know how the government's policies are working in the real world and want to know what needs to change to make things better. Madam Speaker, when a parliamentary committee starts its inquiries, it should call out for the views and comments from various stakeholders throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We should get the social scientists and those scholars at the College of the Bahamas to be involved Madam Speaker, so that we can make evidence-based decisions. We should look at the importance of the voices of economists, of non-governmental organizations, of senior government officials, business persons. Madam Speaker, it is important that all stakeholders are involved in this important exercise. Madam Speaker, we know that many Bahamians are outraged at the state of affairs. But outrage, Madam Speaker, isn't what necessarily will produce results. It's what we do in utilizing what in many cases is righteous outrage when people believe that policymakers are engaged in conflicts that do not advance the welfare of the people on the ground. Today, I believe, Madam Speaker, we have a chance. We have a chance to collaborate in this House on this matter that is so important. Our rules for select committees and the calling of witnesses or traveling to various sites, Madam Speaker, is outlined in Rules 21, 22, and 23, the rules of procedure, and include a select committee shall be appointed on a motion to investigate, examine, or review bills, or in this case, a very specific matter, moved by a member and authorized by this House, and should reflect, as far as practicable, the political composition of the House. Madam Speaker, the rules all the way through, which will be addressed in greater detail by the member for St. Anne's and other members, gives us the power, Madam Speaker, to call persons, to call ministers, whether it's those persons in the Defense Force, whether it's persons in the Department of Immigration, whether it's those committees, Madam Speaker, that's responsible for examining who enters our borders and whether or not they have left on a timely basis. This select committee, in the full light of day, are able to address a whole range of issues. And so, Madam Speaker, let me mention the list of critical items we believe that this select committee ought to have as terms of reference. One, Madam Speaker, there is a need for us to do a thorough examination of our border security, inclusive of what is the required amount of resources to finish the Sandy Bottom initiative, and where is that allocation coming from in the budget. Secondly, Madam Speaker, what is the complement? What are the number of drones that will be deployed and in which location, Madam Speaker? To what extent are we, and on what timeline, are we beefing up the secondary base in Inagua or additional locations in the southern Bahamas? The second term of reference that this select committee ought to look at is, Madam Speaker, to carry out a complete audit of all current work permit holders and the persons for whom they are employed, to ensure that the persons holding the work permits are working in the location that they are designated to work, and that those persons who have applied on their behalf are in fact living up to all of the obligations. Madam Speaker, we should also scrutinize the entire process of the granting of visas. And Madam Speaker, we have heard for time immemorial that we have a challenge in terms of how visas are processed. There are also concerns having been raised with respect, Madam Speaker, to the granting of permanent residencies and citizenship. Madam Speaker, all of these matters ought to be up for review. Madam Speaker, this select committee should develop the means to address the entire issue surrounding pathways to citizenship in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. This select committee gives this government an opportunity, even after the ruling that is being contemplated at the Privy Council, this government ought to engage in a very candid discussion about the various pathways to citizenship in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And Madam Speaker, we should seize this opportunity to address this issue and address this issue candidly. The next term of reference, Madam Speaker, is we should have a thorough review of how our administrations, this administration, and in the past, have treated with CARICOM, the OAS, the various organs of the United Nations in addressing the migration dilemma that we face in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. To what extent have we petitioned for assistance with resources to address the vexing problems that we have in terms of settlement of migrants that are here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to assist in the repatriation costs that are affecting the budget of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? Madam Speaker, the way in which we interact with all multilateral organizations that address this issue of international migration, we should examine through this select committee as well. Madam Speaker, it is an urgent imperative of this administration to address the irregular communities, the shanty towns that exist. It is important that this select committee look at all that this government has been doing and proposes to do. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister has to clarify an important issue relative to what is this government's position on shanty towns. It appears, Madam Speaker, that there are two different narratives at play at the moment, and it is our hope as we examine this issue that the government speaks with one voice in terms of its intention. Madam Speaker, now that the restrictions imposed by the injunction has now been lifted, the restrictions have been lifted, the question is, how will we proceed in terms of addressing the shanty towns? We believe that by putting this matter in the full light of day, the government can speak, and we are prepared to offer advice, Madam Speaker. The government can speak clearly on how it intends to proceed. Madam Speaker, there is a need for a housing revolution so that persons can make a transition from shanty towns into homes, whether they are rentals, whether they're being leased, or whether they're being purchased. But the message has to be clear that the government intends to proceed in ensuring that we eliminate the shanty towns. Most Bahamians and persons in the international community clearly recognize that there is no way that we are going to simultaneously break down all of the houses, Madam Speaker, and put people on the road. But what we did not hear in the Prime Minister's comments is there a plan for a housing explosion? Is there a timetable to make this happen? And what about an inventory of all rental units that are available in the Bahamas, so that we do not want to create separate and unequal communities in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? And so the Prime Minister has to send to the public an unambiguous message about what the intention is, because there are two signals that are presently have presently gone out, both to the local community and the international community, that we are going to move urgently, but wait. And so it's important, Madam Speaker, for this clarification to be presented by the Prime Minister. We are, Madam Speaker, adopting intentionally a conciliatory position with this administration, because we believe working with them on this critical issue is absolutely important. Madam Speaker, in addressing these irregular communities, Madam Speaker, it is important that the government clearly shows the timeline that it intends to move, and it is my hope when the Prime Minister addresses this issue today that he is able to lay out the timeline. Madam Speaker, the next term of reference for this select committee is that there is a need, Madam Speaker, for us to answer a series of questions we have not been able to hear the government answer before. How many illegal migrants are in the Bahamas today? How many shanty towns are there, and what is the composition of the shanty towns? How many Bahamians? What percentage of those persons in the shanty towns are Bahamians? How many of them have status, and how many of them do not have status? Madam Speaker, any decision we make as a government has to answer these and other questions. The problem is, Madam Speaker, many of the questions that people are asking, we have not yet been able to provide answers for. A select committee would allow us to go through the menu of questions that are very important to the Bahamian people and important to our partners who we are asking for their assistance to work with us as we address this decades-old problem. We need to make policy decisions that are evidence-based. And the only way we're going to make evidence-based decisions, Madam Speaker, is for us to do the necessary studies. One of the reports that I brought today, Madam Speaker, was a report that was overseen by the Honorable Dion Folks when he was in the chair. And we did a survey of shanty towns throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, while that was a step in the right direction so we could have a clear sense of what we were up against, Madam Speaker, there are additional studies that are necessary to allow us to put in place policies that will get results, not policies that will have unintended bad consequences. And so, Madam Speaker, policymakers, in my view, have to be careful that we are not making policies simply because we are under duress. But we should know that the policies we put in place will achieve the result that we have in mind. And so, Madam Speaker, it is important for us to make evidence-based decisions, and in order to do so, we must conduct the necessary studies. I do believe I have an hour, Madam Speaker, for the resolution. Yes? Okay, good. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is important for us to establish a confidential intelligence unit with the objective of gathering more timely information on migrant movements. Madam Speaker, we must address the issue of corruption in the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, we've put in place, and I'll come to that in just a moment, we attempted when we were in government under the leadership of the Honorable Ellsworth Johnson and Brent Simonet to put in place a cashless system in the Department of Immigration. We were encouraged to hear that the government is doing everything possible to make sure that we collect the required resources that others have collected on our behalf. And so, Madam Speaker, we have to address the issue of corruption among different gatekeepers, Madam Speaker. And so it is important that this select committee examine the role that employers, Bahamians and expatriate alike, play in terms of, Madam Speaker, applying for permits on behalf of persons, but not following the guidelines required to ensure that they work in the particular positions they have agreed to, and that they also honor the agreement that they make as employers. Madam Speaker, if an employee, a migrant, is living in substandard housing conditions, that is in large measure a reflection on those that encouraged them to come to the country or who hired them while they were here as an irregular or undocumented migrant. And so, Madam Speaker, it is important for us to address the issue of corruption. We must make sure, Madam Speaker, that we utilize the mystery shopping that is in place now in the ministry, where one is able to test the system to see if the wheels of this system only move by grease. We should, Madam Speaker, continue to ensure that we test the system to make sure, from the minister to the person who is receiving the application, that there is no illegal or unethical behavior that is being manifested. A select committee, in our view, can assist us in this regard, and we ask members opposite to resist the temptation to tell the Bahamian people that we are going to do what we're doing, when the reality, Madam Speaker, is the public is absolutely clear
that if we do more of the same, we're going to get the kinds of results that we have gotten for the last 50 years. Madam Speaker, we also ought to aggressively enforce the immigration law, but to do so with humanity. Madam Speaker, I listened with great interest to the numbers that were given by the Prime Minister and earlier by the member for Carmichael, relative to how many persons were interdicted and repatriated. Madam Speaker, one of the things, unfortunately, was not indicated, Madam Speaker, is how many persons have entered the country to the best of their knowledge. Madam Speaker, I heard that one boat, one vessel, one vessel over the last, I believe it was what, a year or so, that may have entered the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, I may have misheard because because it could not be possible that only one vessel in the last few months would have come to the Bahamas or in the last year. Madam Speaker, it is important that we examine our surveillance system and we examine the relationship between the neighboring countries and the agreements that we presently have to determine if those agreements, Madam Speaker, is yielding the results that the Bahamian people need in terms of border surveillance. And Madam Speaker, many persons are coming to our shores not by boat, but they're coming by plane, and they are overstaying their time. So in many countries, the inordinate number of migrants that are in a country, or irregular migrants, they are here not because they came on a boat, but they came legitimately through the airport, and they overstayed, and we have not as a country been diligent enough to track them and to apprehend them. And so, Madam Speaker, Select Committee can help us, Madam Speaker, address this issue. How do we tighten up this system? And it is my hope that the Minister would be able to speak to whether or not they have numbers on how many persons come into the country by air and overstay their time, and what is the comparison between those numbers and the number of persons that come by vessel. Madam Speaker, the immediate focus should be, one of the immediate focus of this Select Committee should be to look at the nexus or the correlation or relationship between illegal migration and human trafficking, gun trafficking, Madam Speaker, and drug trafficking. Those of us who are familiar with some of the things that happen on the streets in the Bahamas clearly know that some of our brothers and sisters, some of the countries from the South, are the conduit through which people, drugs, and guns make it into the Bahamas. And so the Select Committee should look transparently at those pathways that people, guns, and drugs enter into the country. Madam Speaker, the Select Committee should also look at how we can rebuild trust among Bahamians and migrants in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, a lot of Bahamians are disillusioned with what they have seen over the last few decades by successive administrations as it relates to this issue. I believe the government would make a huge mistake in believing that we can do brief national addresses with a limited amount of meat on the bone, and that Bahamians are going to accept and have confidence that we are going to change the plight of our people. Madam Speaker, I believe that it is critical that this Select Committee also look at how can the government, the ruling party, the opposition, work in tandem to restore the hope in Bahamian people that we have their back, that we intend to act in their interests, that we are willing to listen to them so that we can pivot in a different direction, since some of the things that we have been doing have not worked in their best interest. And Madam Speaker, if we doubt it, we only need to look at the absence of land reform. There are Bahamians who have been fighting for years to get agriculture land. In New Providence, many people just want a half an acre, 2 acres, 3 acres to farm. Or they want crown grants for entrepreneurial initiatives. But Madam Speaker, they have a problem gaining access to a half an acre, a quarter acre, but they see people who come from another country are sitting on 5 acres and 10 acres. They know Bahamians and non-Bahamians who are mining acres of land in New Providence and elsewhere with impunity. So, Madam Speaker, having served as the Minister of Agriculture, there are many persons on agriculture land that Bahamians and those who we give permission to can be given access for farming purposes. And so, Madam Speaker, one of the things that when I was the Minister of Agriculture that we did is we followed the law by getting an opinion from the Attorney General's office. We worked with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of National Security, and the Attorney General's office. We held a town meeting, which was required. We posted notices as was required because there was contamination of the water table in North Andros, inclusive of finding fecal matter in the water. All the documents are available on file. And persons immediately responded, asking for an extension while they seek to move, asking for an attempt to purchase land. But persons responded. We did it, Madam Speaker, quietly. We didn't want it to become a show, a performance. We wanted to follow the law and return the land to the rightful owners. And so to the question from West End and Bimini, Madam Speaker, that is one example of the steps we took to ensure that persons occupying Crown land, agriculture land, would no longer occupy it since they did not have the right to do so. And so, Madam Speaker, if we attempt to do business as usual, the Bahamian people are likely, Madam Speaker, to continue to demonstrate outrage. We have an opportunity to rebuild trust among the Bahamian people, and also, Madam Speaker, to rebuild trust among persons who are born in other countries who are here. Because let us be real, a number of persons who are here, even with status, have in fact been brutalized in the Bahamas. We have any number of court rulings to show that we have lost that battle with a number of persons. And so we have to build trust also with migrant communities, Madam Speaker. And so it is important, Madam Speaker, that one of the terms of reference for this committee is to rebuild trust among Bahamians and migrant community. Madam Speaker, it's important that the Select Committee also travel throughout the Bahamas, Madam Speaker, to see all of these communities that presently exist and to hear from the government in terms of what is the specific plan, what is the plan for Abaco, what is the specific plan with respect. I listened attentively to the housing vision of the minister. And Madam Speaker, it is important to ramp up the production of homes. There's always been a scarcity, but there's a great scarcity for Bahamians, but there will be a greater scarcity, Madam Speaker, as we seek to make sure that these unregulated communities do not proliferate in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And Madam Speaker, one of the reasons we need to have an open-air discussion is because Bahamians, they listen to us, and one of the things that people are fed up about is we talk about this legal impediment that we face in terms of stopping the growth of shanty towns. Well, the truth of the matter is nothing prevented us from stopping new construction even when the injunction was in place. So for example, the government has been in for over 15 months. Buildings were still being constructed. And so, Madam Speaker, it's one thing to have a court order that prevented you from breaking down existing homes. What prevented us from stopping new homes, new illegal homes from being built? And Madam Speaker, again, this is not confined to the PLP. It happened under both administrations. And so, Madam Speaker, we have to demonstrate that we have the will to address this issue. Madam Speaker, Haiti is embroiled in a civil war. So, Madam Speaker, one of the things that we believe is absolutely important is that in our conversations, as the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Immigration as they travel internationally. One of the items, I believe, Madam Speaker, that should be on their agenda is to not only have a sober conversation, Madam Speaker, with the multilateral organizations, but they should also be talking unilaterally to those countries that have contributed to the dilemma in Haiti. We've talked in this House, and there are several members on that side that are committed to reparations, Madam Speaker. Well, France should be involved in providing reparations to Haiti in a substantial way. And we would join the government in lending our voice to the role that those colonizers played in trampling upon the rights of the Haitian people, extracting resources, and in many ways, Madam Speaker, putting them in a very difficult position in the international community. And those countries that collaborated with France, including our neighbor to the north, Madam Speaker, who we ought to approach about a greater role that the United States can play, not only in remedying situations in Haiti, working in tandem with the United Nations and the Bahamian and CARICOM, but also what role they might play in the Bahamas, since we have a shared challenge, since migrants are either moving to the Bahamas or through the Bahamas. And so Madam Speaker, it is important that these are matters that are put on the front burner, that the Minister with responsibility for immigration, the Minister with responsibility for foreign affairs, and of course the Prime Minister, that they address these issues with various multilateral organizations and countries that can be of benefit to the Bahamas fight to ensure that we, Madam Speaker, address what is a crisis for us. Madam Speaker, we are aware that there are members of the United Nations, different organizations in the United Nations, that help with settlements, the construction of homes. It is my hope that the Prime Minister has already begun discussions about how we might benefit, Madam Speaker, from assistance in that regard. And the Minister, as Minister of Finance, as we explode a housing revolution, that we look at how we might access preferential rates on loans, given the fact that we are not only vulnerable due to climate change, but we're also vulnerable based on our geographical location and the ways in which the migrant populations from the south can potentially negatively affect our condition here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, the Select Committee should also look at the fisheries bill. It is our understanding, Madam Speaker, that there is great concern among fishers in terms of the potential damage that can be done to their way of life because of unsafe practices by migrants who come from other jurisdictions. And so, Madam Speaker, the Select Committee should look carefully at the fisheries bill, the concerns expressed by Bahamian fishers throughout the Bahamas, with a view of determining whether or not, Madam Speaker, that the criticisms that they offer merit urgent intervention by this administration to ensure that the fishing practices developed in other jurisdictions do not negatively impact the life of our marine resources, in particular the coral reefs, in particular the conch stock, in particular the lobster stock in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the other term of reference for this Select Committee to engage in an assessment and acceptance of the reality, Madam Speaker, that what we are facing in terms of immigration, much like climate change, is an existential threat to our development. Madam Speaker, we would like for the Prime Minister, as he travels internationally, to again draw greater attention to this issue as well in terms of the challenges that we face due to immigration, illegal immigration, and irregular migration. Madam Speaker, the final point I wish to raise, Madam Speaker, is one, Madam Speaker, that I believe we've talked about a great deal, but we have not seen sufficient action in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, it's important for us to appreciate that we have gaps in our workforce. And so this particular select committee should be engaged in a manpower, a woman power audit to determine what gaps exist in our labor market that we must fill from outside at the white collar level and at the blue collar level. This should be a sober discussion, Madam Speaker. We shouldn't run from it simply because we have a serious crisis in the country relative to irregular migration. We should control migration. We should organize systems to ensure that in much the same way the migrants who come in benefit, that the Bahamas benefits, Madam Speaker. And so, therefore, it is our recommendation that this select committee would address the issue, Madam Speaker, of a human power audit to determine where there are gaps in our workforce, what skill sets are missing, which countries near and far do we look at in order to attract those kinds of skill sets who will come in and work within the parameters we set out as a country. And in anyone coming to join our workforce, that they do not in any way displace the primacy of Bahamian workers. Not all of the skill sets that we desire are resident in the Bahamas. So as we build the capacity of Bahamians, Madam Speaker, it is important for us to also utilize skill sets that come from other countries. Whether from the South or whether from the North, we should be open. However, Madam Speaker, this is a matter that we should litigate in the full light of day, because our previous efforts to do so, again, have been met with great cynicism and skepticism by the Bahamian people. Many of our citizens still believe that some policymakers have just thrown up the white flag. And so if you're in financial services, there are some of our people who believe that a lot of the jobs are reserved for others from distant lands in the north, and the relationship manager job, which Bahamians are well able to carry out, often the insufficient Bahamians are given opportunities in those positions. And similarly, at the blue-collar level, there's a view that somehow migrants coming in are undercutting the prices that Bahamians would ordinarily make, when the truth is, in some of those occupations, we don't know for a fact if we have adequate Bahamians working in those places. Well, a select committee will allow us, Madam Speaker, to look at this issue dispassionately and arrive at a less of an emotive but a sensible decision on what we ought to do in terms of strengthening our workforce. And so, Madam Speaker, I close by once again encouraging us to form a select committee that would look at the digitization program at the ministry with responsibility for immigration, to make sure that the system is consistently working, that the software and the system is consistently working, that persons are not circumventing the system in order for their own personal purposes, that we make sure the intelligence unit that addresses the issue of corruption anywhere in the system, not just in the Department of Immigration, but in any of our uniform branches or anywhere elsewhere, that we address that issue as well, Madam Speaker. And so I close by appealing to this administration to join us in establishing this select committee that we believe would have a positive impact on addressing the migration and the illegal immigration issue in the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, Dr. Dawn Marshall, seminal work on the subject entitled The Haitian Problem, Illegal Migration to the Bahamas, underscores the current disposition of Haiti and the growing concerns of Bahamians, and provides an excellent opportunity for public focus and discourse on all matters related to this crisis. For this reason, Madam Speaker, my colleagues and I are prayerful that this Parliament would move with a greater sense of urgency, that we would work outside of our comfort zone, that we would shed any spirit of arrogance that tells us that what we're doing is sufficient and that it will result in improving the plight of Bahamians, in protecting our patrimony, while at the same time behaving in a humane way with those that have fled their country looking for a better way. And it's against this backdrop I call for the establishment, Madam Speaker, of a select committee to deal with the issue of illegal immigration and migration.
Thank you, Honourable Member. For a seconder, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for St. Barnabas.
No, I have some important business. I got to make some money. No, I got to make some money, man. I have to work. I've been relegated to the poverty level.
Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise on this occasion on behalf of the people of St. Barnabas and the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. As always, grateful to be a citizen of the greatest country in the world, the greatest nation, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I thank Almighty God for His continued grace over my life and the opportunity to serve in this Parliament. Madam Speaker, I stand here today with what I would view a necessary sense of sobriety to discuss this issue of a select committee on illegal immigration. Madam Speaker, let me say for the outset what I believe every member in here would say and ought to believe, but truly in a way that the Bahamian people would wish to see it in an actionable way. I believe in the sovereignty of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and I believe, and I say this without reservation and without hesitation and without any implied malice, that Bahamians should be first, and their priorities and what is needed to cradle their dreams and aspirations should be first in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. So I want to establish from the get-go, and for all of us, and when I say all of us, not only in here, but Bahamians out there, not to be. I reject the notion that any discussion about this issue of illegal immigration simply goes into the bucket of xenophobia. There is no doubt, Madam Speaker, that there ought to be a humane way that we address this illegal immigration issue. But let there be no doubt that at the end of the day, immigration reform that is needed in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas must have at its very base and have anchored the fact that Bahamians must be first in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this Parliament in which we sit first met on September 29th, 1729. It is one of the oldest parliaments in the Western Hemisphere. And in this moment, Madam Speaker, what I think that we ought to be thinking about as parliamentarians is one day the longevity of this parliament will be compared to the legacy of what we did over the time that this parliament has existed. And so today in this discussion, let us strip away our political biases, our political prejudices, and the inclination to serve our own politics and to address this in a real way for the benefit of the Bahamian people. Let us not worry about the next general election. Let us worry about the next generation. Because the truth that also belies in this discussion, Madam Speaker, as has been said, we have been grappling with this issue of illegal immigration for the last 40-plus years. And successive administrations have missed some real opportunities to make headway on these issues. And so, Madam Speaker, we know that if we want to speak truth and if we want to bring honor to this discussion, we must ensure that truth advances. It must be a discussion as we move forward to have this select committee appointed. It must be a discussion about even Bahamians who are complicit in some of the issues that are leading to illegal immigration. It must be a discussion about the other considerations that the Bahamian people feel have been dictating the debate on this issue. There are many Bahamians who feel that this discussion has been diminished by what political considerations are there. That is a fact. That is a fact. And that's why I said, let us not be concerned about the next general election. Let us be concerned about the next generation of Bahamians. And that is often a bit hard. That is often a bit hard for us as politicians. But we ought to deal with it in a real and sincere way. Madam Speaker, let me say also, as I hear certain things emanating from different places. As I say these things, Madam Speaker, I claim not to have no monopoly on loving the Bahamas and loving the Bahamian people. I claim not to have that. I would never be so arrogant as to say that. What I am saying is that the Bahamian people want our words and our rhetoric to match up with our actions, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, decades of the issue of illegal immigration that we have skirted for quite some time, Madam Speaker. As Bahamians, as we speak today, Bahamians wonder, how is it that they have to operate within due bounds and within the law as it relates to the occupation of land, and they see others occupying land illegally. That is a fact and that is the truth. That's what the Bahamian people are feeling. And we have a duty, I believe, Madam Speaker, from the depths of my heart to the soles of my feet, we have an obligation and duty to the Bahamian people to address this issue in a real way. Madam Speaker, the Bahamian people are frustrated. This is not a political statement. The Bahamian people are frustrated because they feel, in so many ways, they are second-class citizens in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And again, if we strip away our colors, our red and our yellow and our other colors, we will find truth. And as it is said, the truth will set us free. It will bring the solutions. And that's why this select committee is so important. Because in a meaningful and structural way, it will allow us to have a bipartisan engagement on assessing the issue of illegal immigration in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition would have quoted a number of the former prime ministers. The truth is, as you go throughout the history of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in past speeches, you will find littered speeches from our leaders talking about, even the present Prime Minister, the member for Cat Island and Rum Cay, has talked about the great burden that's been placed on the Bahamian people for decades and continues to be placed on the Bahamian people. How can we talk about, Madam Speaker, trying to create a Commonwealth of the Bahamas where Bahamian families can truly feel that they will prosper and promise the next generation of children a prosperous country when we have not only this issue, but all issues that affect our ability to give it to them? And the illegal immigration is one. It is a sensitive issue, Madam Speaker. It is very, very sensitive. The reality of it is that the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, in many respects, has been built with the assistance and efforts of persons from other countries. And we don't need to belabor that point. That is a fact. The truth is, all of us have friends and family members from persons from sister Caribbean countries, whether it be Jamaica, whether it be Haiti, whatever you want to call it. So we know how sensitive this is. This is really sensitive. But at the end of the day, we have an opportunity and a responsibility for the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Even as a member of Parliament, I have on my team members who are in fact Bahamians, but who parents of Haitian heritage. And I have this discussion with them because I want them to know this isn't about malice for the Haitian community or any community. This is about the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. This is about the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And the reality of it is that our culture right now is a mixture of so many cultures. And so it doesn't make sense to not want to have the conversation, but there must be a level of decency and a level of respect and a level of focus and responsibility in terms of leadership as we have this discussion. Because the truth is, if we do not address this in a real way and have some serious illegal immigration reform, the Bahamas will be a very different place from now in 10, 15, 20 years. And, Madam Speaker, we do it to the benefit not only for the Bahamian people, but we do it for the benefit for those people who have migrated illegally to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and now live here and help us build the Bahamas. So it isn't just about, as they say, the raw-boned Bahamian. It's about all of us that live here and try to follow the laws of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Simply put, Madam Speaker, you cannot have one set of persons following the laws that will allow enrichment and prosperity and development to happen and some others not. I've said before, we've heard the argument that many want to come to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for a better way of life. Many. It's not just those from down south. Americans come to the Bahamas, many Americans come to the Bahamas for a better way of life. But the truth is, Madam Speaker, the Bahamian people deserve first and foremost a better way of life in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, and here's the thing, Madam Speaker. I know there might be, again, an inclination by some that may want to pull this into politics. But I'm going to resist. I am going to resist that, Madam Speaker. I stand here, yes, as a parliamentarian, but I speak as a Bahamian, deeply concerned about this. And the truth is, very shortly, the members opposite will get to speak in this debate. speak in this debate, and we will hear what they will have to say. So, Madam Speaker, if we are serious about immigration reform, then we have to be prepared to talk honestly, and without fear. Like I said, of being labeled xenophobic, and we have to listen to the Bahamian people, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, what will history say about this Parliament in our 50 years of independence if we do not embrace and address this issue in a real and substantive way, Madam Speaker? What are we here for, Madam Speaker? What are we here for if not to address issues like this, and this issue that continues to pervade the consciousness of the Bahamian people? So we support the idea, Madam Speaker, of a select committee that gives us the ability to strip away the politics, and to come up with evidence-based solutions for the illegal immigration crisis, and something that has plagued us for the last 40 years, the issues of border security, the issues of the issuance of work permit, the issues of holding our own people accountable, who connect their electricity to shanty towns, to employers who are complicit in allowing people who don't have any work permits to work. So we need to have a serious discussion, a serious discussion. When I was a young boy, I remember in the early 80s, this discussion of illegal immigration. And when you start to have a serious discussion, when you're having a serious discussion, for those persons who had a worker, an illegal worker working for them, it would always be said, yeah, we talk about immigration, but don't touch my worker. Deal with all the other workers. We all know how we used to say that, right? All right? Okay? And so, Madam Speaker, this is something, we could play around with this all we want, but this is something at the end of the day, the Bahamian people are going to hold all of us accountable for. PLP and FNM, whoever it may be. And as important as the discussions in CARICOM and other global partners are, they are very important, very important. I wouldn't stand here as a part of the legislature and say that it's not. But the discussions, what's more important is the discussion that we have in the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and this select committee gives us that opportunity. Because the truth is, Madam Speaker, even with the best intentions, any solutions that come from CARICOM and other partners will not have the view that we will have. While there are mutual interests, no doubt. The point I'm making is us here, we here, as persons in the Bahamian Parliament, must do what we can and must lead on this issue to ensure that what we've promised the Bahamian people in the short term and in the long term, because the illegal immigration even affects what the government of the day wants to do relative to health care and education and you name it, and national security. That's the reality. That is the reality. And if we don't do anything, it will continue to happen whenever there's a new government. And so this is real. It affects every impact of our society, Madam Speaker. Again, it is not an easy discussion, but I truly feel it is the way in which we discuss it, and I believe that the appointment of a select committee, Madam Speaker, the opposition believes that the appointment of a select committee gives us the opportunity to address this illegal immigration issue in a way that we have not dealt with it in the past 40 years, covering successive administrations, Madam Speaker. What I also wish just to tap into again, Madam Speaker, is, I talked about how there are members of my team whose parents have Haitian parentage and so forth. And I'm sure that's the case. That's not only the case in St. Barnabas and so forth, because the reality of it is that's our population now. But I don't want us, Madam Speaker, I don't want us to be afraid of having this discussion because of political considerations or what we believe may hurt our politics, our personal politics, or even our national politics, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, with those very, very brief remarks, Madam Speaker, I support the motion for the appointment of a select committee on illegal immigration. I believe it's important for the future prosperity of the Bahamian people and the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I believe it's important for this Parliament, in 50 years of independence, it's important for this Parliament to take it up and to keep in mind, as I said earlier, that the longevity of this Parliament from 1729 to now must be matched with a legacy that will truly bring honor and pride to the Bahamian people. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the following select committee be appointed: to inquire into and investigate all matters relating to the immigration crisis in the Bahamas, with power to send for persons and papers, with leave to sit from place to place, and with leave to sit during the recess. As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for West
Madam
Grand
Speaker,
Bahama.
it's the appropriate time for us to take a break now for lunch and return at 3 o'clock when the member will take the floor.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Thank you, honourable member. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House be suspended until 3 p.m. As many are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The business of this House is now suspended until 3 p.m.